Good morning. Thanks for coming today for the presentation. Larry Head's going to talk about Nike missiles. We thank the VFW for hosting again today. I think we're going to be here through the end of the year. But let's take a moment now as we offer a prayer. Lord, our Holy Father, the Creator of all, we give you great thanks for this nation that we live in, for the many blessings you've provided us. We give you thanks for the food that's been prepared today. We thank you for the Bronstein Foundation, who always thinks of us and provides financial support. We offer great thanks for all the volunteers, for those who donate dollars, for those who donate things from their past that we could learn from and appreciate in the future. And we ask this day that in those hot spots around the world where U.S. people are present, military is present, that you would keep them safe within the palm of your hand and not let them go. We ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Are you going to be filming the next one and destroy your Yes, they are all three of them.
Test. Okay. I guess I can stop saying test now. And please join me with a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Feel free to join in the national anthem. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets in glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Testing. Good morning. Got a few announcements today. First thing is this Warbird weekend. This is canceled because the Warbird coming from St. Louis is a B-25 and one of the engines wasn't working right, so we'd rather be safe than sorry. So we canceled that. They're not coming over. They canceled 3 weeks ago because of weather. Hopefully we'll have them in the future. So if you're planning on coming out this weekend, you can still come out and visit, bring somebody with you. These are our next 4 talks or so. Destroyers by Mike Clark, then a Stearman by Dr. John Bazal. He's sitting over in that area. Persian Gulf War, the first pilot, he's a judge up in Indianapolis. He's the first pilot to fly over enemy territory during the Persian Gulf War. So he'll talk about the Persian Gulf War, which we haven't had for a while. And December 19th is a real special day. One of us is going to fly to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and there's a 101-year-old guy sitting there. He's the last of 2 P-47 pilots that are alive. And we're going to interview him from all his time. He's very with it, and we're going to put it on this video here, but he will be live and you'll be able to ask questions. So I'd like you to write the questions down that day so he'll be able to hear everything. But his name's Bob Huddleston. Okay. So those are the 4 things that are coming up. There's a couple other things. We have what you call Trick or Treat. It's October 30th, 2024. That'll be a Sunday, so you'll have time off. You won't be rushed on Monday, and you can bring your kids or grandkids or nieces or nephews out. We have Trick or Treat, and we also have a scavenger hunt, so they learn a little something. They'll get the candy, but they'll learn something about the P-47, about wartime things. So it's an educational process. They have about 13 things they have to do. Usually the parents do a good part of it, but they do learn something. That's October 30th on 11/11, the 11th hour, 11th day, 11th month. That's Veterans Day. We will have a breakfast at the Evans Wartime Museum. It's free to veterans. You can bring your spouses. And so that'll start about 6:30 to 7, really about 7 in the morning. It goes to about 10. It's bacon and eggs, sausage, and biscuits and gravy, and it's good for your heart. So we're going to talk today. I'm going to introduce this young gentleman. He's the one singing the national anthem, and also and he does our newsletter. If you're not getting a newsletter, we'd be glad to put you on the email. Just come up and we'll put you on the email. He writes it every month, and it's a fabulous piece of information. Everything went on in the museum. He's got his Nike stuff on. Talk about a little bit of SALT 1, SALT 2, and nuclear things. But I know there's several teachers in here. I know Mr. Grannon's a teacher, but I continue to ask people at the hospital, nurses and personnel there, when did the atom bomb fall? And I quit asking it because I get so depressed. Most of them don't know what country, what year, and what day or anything. And that changed the place of the planet Earth forever. And most people don't know that. Now, Mr. Grannon, if I checked his students, I think they would all know that. But now, not every teacher here, I don't know, taught about atom bomb. But it has changed our life. That's only 80 years ago or so. And we cannot have the wrong person with the wrong, have be able to push the button. We already experienced Hitler. We experienced the Japanese in World War II. And people can do about anything. And the wrong person on the button will be a problem. So Larry Head has talked about the hump before. That's over, his dad was stationed in the hump over in India and China. And his dad was stationed over there, and you had to be, a person that ate nails to be there. But Larry's going to talk about his experiences, and he's called it Nike and some things about nuclear things. Thank you. Did I say it right, Larry, or did I mess it up?
Got it. I'm on. Yeah, you were close. My name's Larry Head. I was in the Army from 67 to 1970. My MOS was a nuclear weapons electronics maintenance and calibration specialist. And as part of that, I got involved with the Nike Hercules missile system, and that's what we're going to talk about today. All right? Well, guess I'm going to do it this way. Oh, thank you. This is my topic, Nike Hercules, America's last line of defense. Mark just talked about the Cold War. That was the prologue to the Nike Hercules. The atomic bomb was in the hands of both the U.S. and the Soviets. President Truman in March of 1947 delivered a speech to Congress that committed the U.S. to actively offer assistance to preserve political integrity to democratic nations that were being threatened by the Soviets. He announced that announcement was the beginning of the Cold War. Oops. The Russians were developing bombers that could carry nuclear weapons. Now this is the Tu-14 Bull. At first flew in 1947. That was an exact copy of a B-29. We had landed several B-29s in Soviet territories, they refused to give them back, and they reverse engineered the B-29 to create this aircraft. It went into service in 1949, and that is the same year that the Soviets exploded their first atomic bomb. This is a Tupolev Tu-16 Badger. It was jet-powered strategic bomber. It demonstrated that the rapid change the Soviets were doing in their technology for their aircraft. This is a Tu-95 Bear intercontinental bomber. It was powered with turboprop engines. Has eight props. Each engine has 2 counter-rotating props. It was capable of reaching every city in the United States. They're still flying them today, and they're routinely intercepted by fighters of us, our allies and ourselves. Okay, how many remember the Cold War? Do you remember kids practicing duck and cover? See signs for fallout shelters on buildings? And some families had their own fallout shelter. Our fallout shelter was our basement. Our shelf-stable foods were kept in a cabinet downstairs and rotated up to the kitchen. When Mom went downstairs, that was going to be our fallout shelter. Beginning of the Cold War, the U.S. relied on Army anti-aircraft gun batteries to protect us from aircraft. These were World War II 90-millimeter guns. The 4-gun batteries were manually loaded, but automatically aimed using radar, a data computer, and an M9 gun director. This is the radar and computer up here. This is the gun director. These guns would be aimed by the radar. Oops. Near the end of World War II, the military realized it was no longer going to be able to defend against faster aircraft that were being developed by, like we saw in previous slides. Chief of Ordnance issued a requirement for a new guided missile weapon in 1945. The result would be the Nike Ajax anti-aircraft missile system. The first test firing was in 1946. The Nike Ajax was deployed first in 1954, so it took about 8 years to get from development to being deployed. It was a 2-stage missile that used solid fuel booster and liquid fuel main engine. Ajax was deployed in multiple launcher batteries. Missiles were stored underground and moved to the surface for launch. Each battery could have up to 24 launch sites. Normally they had 12, and the one we show here in this picture has 16 right there. And this yellow arrow right there is showing you the elevator door that comes from the underground magazine. And like I said, it was liquid fuel. The second stage utilized JP4, which is a kerosene type product mixed with an oxidizer that was red fuming nitric acid. It was very hazardous to handle. You can see these gentlemen are wearing chemical suits. It was gravity fed into the missile. If you mixed the oxidizer and the fuel together, it was constant. It went combusted immediately. It didn't take anything to start it. You just mixed the two fuels together and immediately could have a firing explosion. I'm not doing my clicker very well here. Okay, there's a delay. Nike Hercules development. In 1953, serious limitations of the Ajax platform were realized. The warhead was not effective against massed bomber formations, and it had a limited range. Bell Labs, Western Electric, and Douglas Aircraft developed the new platform to address those issues. The result was a Nike Hercules missile and major improvements to the radar and guidance systems. The first Nike Hercules test launch to destroy a target was in July of 1958. It utilized a conventional warhead. Comparing the two missiles, Ajax was smaller diameter, and lighter. It was 32 feet 9 inches long. It weighed 2,455 pounds. To compare that, the Nike Hercules was 38 feet 10 inches long and weighed 19,719 pounds. The Ajax could go Mach 2.25. The Hercules could go Mach 3.65. That's 3.65 times the speed of sound if you don't know what Mach is. Range of the Ajax was about 25 miles, can go 65,000 feet in altitude. The Hercules could range 90 miles, it actually go farther than that. And the ceiling was about 150,000. It could carry a conventional or a nuclear warhead. Nike Hercules, when they developed this, was the final design. So number 1 up there is the transponder control group. Number 2 is the antenna horns. Number 3 is the warhead. It could be a T-45 conventional or a W-31 nuclear warhead. Had an M30 solid fuel sustainer engine. They toyed with using liquid fuel on the Hercules too, but it became a real nightmare because it would take 4 times the engines. That was the Ajax. It was terrible. They had accessory power supplies back behind the missile body and a blast tube that conducted the hot gases from the engine to the exhaust. That's where you see equipment around it, but that tube right there is carrying the hot gas from the jet rocket. This is another view of a Nike Hercules that shows you the section. So number 1 is a forward body section. Number 2 is a warhead section. Number 3 is a missile motor section. Number 4 is the equipment section. Number 5 is actuator section, which steered the missile, operated the vanes. And number 6 over there is the booster cluster. It was actually 4 Ajax boosters, same booster they used on the Ajax, but 4 of them clustered together to be the booster section for a Nike Hercules. This is a Nike Hercules solid fuel engine. This was a sustainer engine. This was a solid propellant in here. It had this cross section that would make it burn fast. It was hollow where you see black. There's the blast tube and the nozzle throat. This is an actual photograph of an engine that was photographed on a cart. So the missile and the booster section would be supported by a launching rail. That's what you see down here. The booster section would just basically gravity fit. They pushed the two together. There was no bolts, latches, or anything that held the two together. This orange line you see here, like it says, is sustainer engine ignition lanyard. It was connected to the missile here and to the booster here. When the booster fell away, it pulled that lanyard and that started the timer to start the engine on the missile itself. You can also see some things here. These are elevon locks. They actually locked these surfaces so that when it was in booster mode, the vanes could not move. The missile itself was on a launcher rail. You can see that here. It's just right there. That's the launcher rail. It traveled with the booster when it was in the thing. Then you had the erector launcher down here. You can see the launcher rail better over this drawing here. And this is the launcher erector. This was a launching and handling rail that supported the booster and the missile. When you look at the missile itself, in this case we have the forward section pulled away. That's the forward body control section. This is where the transponders things were. This is where the warhead went, in that part of the missile. This is a missile handling truck. This ring was 4 pieces. There was a band you could take off the missile and access the point to mount that ring. So the 4 pieces we bolted to the missile. Then the missile could sit on this truck with these rollers and they could rotate it. The tail would just roll on these rollers back here. This is the equipment section of the missile. You can see the actuators, and this is the blast tube. This is the actual blast tube from the engine, and it's a sustainer engine, and this is actuators for the hydraulic drive. There's actually a hydraulic accumulator on that that powered. There was no pump. It's another view of the missile. This is some of the equipment sections on the side here. This would be thermal batteries. This is where the hydraulic accumulator would be, and you can still see the ring. We're looking at it from the other end of the missile now. One of the things they had to do with this missile, it was stored underground, but it would go up in, it might be in Alaska, it might be in Florida, it might be in South Desert somewhere. To keep the controls at the right temperatures, you had this umbilical. That's what you see here. They fed air into the missile to maintain temperature in this area at a satisfactory level. You can see that umbilical here when it's out on the launcher. Here we have the forward section. The transponder group, that is what would communicate with the radar once they were launched. You send signals back and forth between the radar that controlled the missile and the missile response. That little red thing right there, that sign says that that has 4,000 volts of electricity under the cover. You don't want to open that up. And the forward fence had an antenna horn, and you can see it here a little bit, see a little bit better over there. This is an antenna horn. It picked up the radar signals from the ground-based radar, and this is a tube that sensed the velocity. It's like a pitot tube on an aircraft. Here you can see the steering vanes on the aircraft. They were actuators, were controlled by commands transmitted from the ground using those hydraulics we talked about a little bit earlier. This is a section of the missile body. This is where that ignition lanyard bracket, the lanyard would connect. There was a port up here, we can't see the other end of it. These are the steering vane locks that kept the vanes from moving. That's an inspection door, and this is the main fin that is in front of the steering vanes. It's another view of the thing. So we're seeing the missile actuator section. You see the rocket thrust motoring. That's what the missile sat into that when it launched. That's what connected it to the booster. Like I said, it just sat in there. And what this gentleman is holding there is the booster section igniter lead. That was the electrical wire that started the solid fuel boosters, ignited them. You had to be careful with that. Static electricity could charge that thing and actually have an accidental booster fire. The nuclear-equipped Nike Hercules were equipped with a barrel element. You can see this is a protective cover on the front of it. The reason they did that is because of this point here. In this view, the protector cover is open, and this is the barometric probe. The barometric probe is unique. It actually was meant to measure the pressure. Right here, there are little holes, and I think, as I recall, 4 of them around the perimeter of that. That point is very sharp, needle sharp. The vanes here steer it, so as a missile turns and gets signals, that can pivot out on the front of the missile and make sure that this is always perpendicular to the airstream. They want no velocity pressure in those ports. They only want barometric static pressure, if that makes sense. You don't want the air pressure from turning be pushing on those sensing holes. So that's why this gimbal was there, to allow this thing to swivel. The T-45 conventional warhead used on a Nike Hercules was 625 pounds of high explosive. It had 20,000 cubical steel pellets molded around the outside of it, like a fragmentation device. It weighed 1,106 pounds, was detonated by an explosive harness. When it exploded, you had a conical blast of those steel pellets and concussion. There's a dead zone on the back end of the missile block is, so this cone here was a dead zone. This is a W-31 nuclear warhead. Here's your nukes marked. This is a nuclear warhead. Diameter about 30 inches, length about 39.5 inches. It weighed 945 pounds and was transported in a container like this. It's an M409 container. This test set you see here, I actually calibrated those when I was in the Army. That was one of the things that my job did, is to calibrate that kind of equipment. This is November 4th of 1962 was the last atmospheric nuclear test that the United States had performed. It was done by a Nike Hercules missile. That was a Nike Hercules warhead. Code name was Dominic Tightrope at altitude of 69,000 feet. Launch site was Johnston Island in the North Pacific, yes. Radars were the key to the Nike Hercules system working. Target acquisition radars would be monitored constantly when the battery's on duty. That rotated, and there would be a gentleman sitting at a scope watching that blip. The original low-powered acquisition radar developed for Ajax would get a name low power when a newer system was developed for the Hercules. This is the IFS, Identification Friend or Foe device. That sends a signal out to aircraft, and the aircraft transponder, if it's a commercial aircraft or whatever, military aircraft, will send a signal back to identify that there are a friendly aircraft. If they don't get something back, they'll assume it's the enemy. Tracking radars. There were 3 different tracking radars on the Nike Hercules system. Nike Hercules target tracking radar tracked a target once it had been verified and taken into the system. Target ranging radar measured the altitude and range away. It was an added radar. It also was used to defeat electronic countermeasures such as chaff and things like that. Missile tracking radar tracked the missile after launch and transmitted steering and detonation commands to the missile. Normally, when you saw a radar, they'd have this weather cover on. This is what the radar looked like. This thing could swivel 180 degrees up and down, and it constantly rotated. Or they could, tracking radar, they actually aimed at tracking radar. It didn't rotate all the time. They actually steered that radar as they watched their scopes. High power radar. This was a big acquisition radar that was developed once they realized that the normal acquisition radar that the Ajax used couldn't see high enough or far enough. That dish is, whoops, hit the wrong button. This dish is about 40 feet wide. It's rotating inside that radome probably about once every 10 seconds. That's a big thing, moving pretty fast. It could detect enemy aircraft at much higher altitude and longer range. Like I said, they called it high power. It was an acronym for it, and they called the old acquisition radar low power. Nike Hercules, I think I missed one. There we go. Low power and high power radars. This is how the battery actually worked. So low power and high power acquisition radars could detect the target. They transmitted that signal to the target tracking and ranging radar system. That locked on the target. That was sent an information to the computer that calculated a intercept point. Once the missile was launched here, missile tracking radar would launch on it and then follow it up, and the missile tracking radar would communicate the steering signals to the missile itself. Hercules missiles could be guided to a ground attack, surface to surface. Well, I blew that. Let's do that. It's supposed to be a little animation of a surface hit. This is a Nike Hercules hitting a ground target. It's a conventional device. They put ahead a target. They actually hit the exact target they aimed for. Hercules missile could be guided to intercept ballistic missiles. In this case, they used a Army Corporal missile, which is you see on the right side there. This is a Corporal. They launched it and used a Hercules to intercept it. And this is, they actually filmed the detonation here. Typical battery layout. A Nike Hercules battery had 2 components. It had the radar area and had the launch area. They had to be separated so that the radars could see the missiles when they were launched. They couldn't be close together. The radar couldn't see that. So the radar and the launch areas were separated anywhere from 1,000 yards to 6,000 yards, normally about a mile apart. It had to be clear line of sight. No trees, no hills. This is a typical integrated fire control area. So you see the radars, high power, low power. This is target tracking radar, target ranging radar, missile tracking radar. These are generator buildings. The site would be using local power until they went on alert. At that time, they disconnected local power, started their own generators. That way, in case something happened to the local power plant, they still had power to run the site. And down here, you see BCT, RCT. This is a the battery command trailer, and this is the radar command trailer. These sites were originally meant to be mobile, so all the equipment was built into trailers. They never changed that. They just would mount the trailers on ground and use them like a building. Here's a closer view of it. This is the battery control trailer, radar control trailer, and this is the interconnect. They call it a corridor building that connected the two, and sometimes there were electronics repair facilities in there and things like that. The battery control trailer would have these things. This is an area plotting board. Over here on this is the acquisition radar operator, be number 7. This would be the battery command officer. This would be the computer operator, and this would be the switchboard operator, communications operator. The batteries, like I said, were on trailers because originally Nike Hercules was designed to be a mobile system. So this is a mobile radar, and this is a mobile launcher on a GOER vehicle. They call it GOER, G-O-E-R. The Army used that for various things. This is the inside of a battery control trailer. It's kind of cramped in there. You can see the crew up here working. This would be the battery control officer right here. This is the acquisition radar operator. This is the computer operator. And this sergeant back here would normally have a device in his hand that used to defeat jamming. This is the horizontal plotter and the vertical plotter. This plotter plotted the direction of the target and the missile. This would be the target pin, this would be the missile pin once it was launched. Before it was launched, it would just be pointing to the predicted point of interception. This was a horizontal plotter. It plotted the altitude. Vertical plotter. It plotted the altitudes of the two, the target and the missile once they were fired. This is the radar control trailer and the target tracking console. This is the target tracking console itself. They had 3 different things they had to track: azimuth, range, and altitude. This is the missile tracking radar. It's operated by a single operator. This is what the electronics, typical electronics of the time, remember they were designed in the late 50s. So this was a circuit board, whoops, I keep doing that. This was a circuit board inside a Nike Hercules missile, and this would be one of the electronic sections in a control trailer. There were vacuum tubes and things like that in there, not transistors. This is a typical launch area. So you had entrance gate at the top, you had a ready building, that's where the crew could wait while they were waiting for activity on breaks and things if they weren't on 24-hour status, then they would be at their stations. We'll talk about a dog kennel after a while. This is a missile assembly building. That's where they would assemble the booster and the missile itself together. This is the warhead building where they actually would sit the warhead in. These are generator buildings. We talked about generators before. This is a launcher gate area. This area was secure area. This is what launcher section A. There are 4 missiles per launcher, A, B, and C. Right here you see a Nike Hercules up on the launcher rail. You have an inner fence and an outer security fence. This is the Nike Hercules launch area. Originally this was in a trailer, this equipment here, but most of them were underground with the battery where the magazines were. There were rooms for the crew to operate. This is what it looked like. So they could operate, this could control 4 missiles and tell what their status was, each one of these, and each one of these is for a different section, A, B, C, and D. And this is manual controls here to do a manual launch. This is what a magazine looked like. It was underground, so you had an elevator door that comes up from the ground. You had a launcher rail above surface. Missiles is where they launch from. You had a storage magazine underneath, had a rail on it. And that's basically how it operated. So the missiles were stored underground horizontally, elevator would bring them up, and then they would be placed in the right position on the surface launcher rail. This is what it looked like, another view of it. So you have these inner rails. Here's the launcher rail, launcher handling rail. This is where the crew could operate, I said underground in a safe place. When you take it up through the elevator, you go on this rail, you have 8 launchers. 3 are on the surface, one of them rides the elevator. This is a launcher control indicator that can tell them what the condition is of every launcher they got up on the surface. You have another launcher control indicators down below. Here's an escape hatch. I went to a battery one time with a sergeant. We were supposed to make a measurement or something. And there's a stairway to this complex underground there. But he decided we're going to go down that escape hatch. I'm carrying a meter in one hand. So we open the hatch and I start down the hatch. There's not a ladder with side rails. The rungs were like staples put in the concrete. So when I climbed down, I had no rail to keep my hand on. So I just had to step down, let go, and grab the next rung. And I wasn't comfortable with that myself, but I think we came out on the stairway. So I don't know why we didn't use it when we went there. This is a typical Nike deployment on the surface, and you'll notice that red area. There's 4 missiles up here, all on their elevators. This red line is the elevator. This is a launcher erector. The 3 missile launcher erectors are mounted above ground, like I said. One of them rides the elevator. And those red arrows are pointing to the transport rails. You see those rails, we slide the missile around. Well, the launch erector fits within those rails and matches those rails so they can slide the missiles right on across. I don't know if that makes sense or not. This is the launch area. Here are the rails, the red arrows again. That's the rails we were talking about that they slide the missiles on, move them from position to position. This is a missile stored in the magazine underground. That's what the magazine looked like. This is another version of the launch control indicator. The yellow is the umbilical. We talked about feeding air to the missile. That's the umbilical. The blue is pointing to the launcher handling rail that moves. And the red is again pointing to our rails. And this was done at a museum, a site that operates as a museum, so they have civilians down there. But they are physically sliding. That blue arrow shows they're physically moving the missile along the rails. That was always done with manpower. It was always soldiers pushing those missiles back and forth on the rails. There's nothing powered about that. This is the launch elevator door looking up. You can see there's a missile here. These are the doors opening that are going to take us to the surface. We talked about that barrel element. You can see one hanging right here on the end of this missile. This missile is getting ready to be raised. It'll come up through the elevator doors to the surface. There's a soldier waiting for it to come all the way up. Now it's at the surface. Crew can move it around. And this little place here, we're showing this enlarged area, shows you these rollers are what are on the missile tracking rail. It's missile tracking rail, and that's what we're all on these positioning rails. Those rollers are on the launching handling rail. Stay with the missile and the booster. Here we have a normal complement of missiles up on the surface. Now I'm going to read something here. This is Blazing Sky was an alert designation for a missile battery to go to battle stations. A suspected attack has been indicated and commands have been transmitted by the Army Air Defense Command Post. That's ADCAP. Nike Hercules missile batteries were part of a missile battalion that received orders from their ADCAP. ADCAP was connected to NORAD and the Air Force Semi-Automatic Ground Environment, SAGE. SAGE received intelligence from the Canadian DEW line. That's what this is. There were other radar lines all across top of Canada. This is a DEW line site. Here we go. We're going to experience a drill, or not a drill, an attack. At time 0, a VHF radio message arrives raising the alert status with the words blazing skies. This is not a drill. Various sirens and horns are activated. Blazing skies is a code word for aggressor engagement. The troops hurry to assigned stations and start equipment. It may have been off. The backup generators are started. The launcher and radar areas are transferred to these. There is time to recheck daily checks and alignment. All looks good. In the launcher area, missiles are being moved to launchers from underground. The acquisition radars are energized and the planned position indicator radar suite goes around. That's this here. The battery commander requests status of all stations. Report ready. Areas ready control. Captain inserts a fire key into the safety lock, permitting a missile launch. The captain sets the site status to red. There are reports of fighter planes actions out of range of the radar. The acquisition radar operators see planes with friendly IFF indications flying toward the battle. Area control starts warning of approaching enemy aircraft. 2 aircraft without friendly IFF symbols are seen at the most distant range of site acquisition radars. These are assigned track names Track 2 and Track 3 by Area Control. Area Control assigns Track 2 to this battery. Track 3 is assigned to another battery. Launch Control Officer selects the missile for launching. The missile tracking radar locks onto it. Usually the Launch Control Officer selects the missile on the elevator if it's ready. When fired, this launcher can quickly be reloaded by lowering, reloading, and raising the elevator. This permits a high rate of fire for all the missiles. Suddenly, the predicted point of intercept radar scope bursts with bright streaks. The Track 2 is hidden in one of them. A hurried toggling of anti-jamming switches shows hints of Track 2 in the now dimmer streaks. The battery commander assigns Track 2 to target radar. Target tracking is assigned. Target tracking radar is locked onto Track 2, the proper lights. Target tracking radar operators report using aided manual because of some jamming in their radar scopes. The computer operator reports computer settled, and the plotting boards and meters show target position, altitude, and ground speed, where the missile would intercept the target if launched now, and the target continues this speed and direction. The time necessary for the missile to fly to this predicted point of intercept. At present, the predicted point of intercept is just out of the effective missile range. As the target is going fast, Mach 1.7, the predicted intercept point is far ahead of the target. The battery commander waits for the PPI is in range. Sorry, I abbreviated that. Feels sure that the lack of IFFs means the plane is really the enemy, not a friendly with an equipment fault. Verifies that the target is not any strategic air command safe corridor and not at a safe altitude, and feels reasonably confident the plane will not turn around, wasting a Nike shot. Fire. The captain has lifted the red switch cover and operated a fire switch. The missile is launched. No sound is heard in the battery control van. The missile will be boosted straight up for 3.4 seconds, gaining speed rapidly. The target is currently 61 miles away and 6.2 miles high. Predicted point of intercept is 41 miles away. Predicted time to intercept is 65 seconds. The plotted pin has tracking the predicted point of intercept now tracks the missile. All this that I've just read happened in 5 seconds. We're 5 seconds in. The missile is 2 miles high, going about straight up, flying at Mach 2.6. The booster has dropped off. The sustainer rocket motor will start in a few seconds. It has turned its bottom toward the predicted intercept point. The computer commands the missile to start diving toward the predicted point of intercept. In the launcher area, the missile elevator is being lowered for reloading. As the target gets closer, we see it better on our radar as our radars burn through jamming. We're now 10 seconds out from the initial contact. The missile is 4.4 miles high, 1.3 miles downrange, flying at Mach 2.5. The computer, using missile tracking information, sends steering commands to the missile. The sustainer rocket motor starts up and will burn for about 30 seconds. We are now 20 seconds into our mission. The missile is flying at Mach 3.5 toward the predicted point of intercept. It's about 7.3 miles high and 6.3 miles downrange from the loft. We are now 30 seconds into our mission. The missile is flying at Mach 3.75 toward the predicted point of intercept. It's about 8.5 miles high, 12 miles downrange from the launcher. Missile sustainer rocket motor has just run out of fuel. The missile is coasting. 50 seconds into the mission. The missile is flying at Mach 3.25 toward the predicted point of intercept, about 7.7 miles high and 28.5 miles from the launcher, about 16 miles from Track 2. The target and missile are approaching head-on. Missile is coasting. 60 seconds into our mission, the missile is flying at Mach 3.25 toward the predicted point of intercept. It's now 6.7 miles high and 36.6 miles from the launcher, about 4.9 miles from Track 2. The target and missile are approaching head-on. Missile is coasting. 1 minute, 4.6 seconds into the mission, the missile and target are both 41.15 miles from the launcher, 6.2 miles high. The missile explodes slightly above and 30 feet in front of the target. Explosion and metal fragments turn Track 2 into unflyable wreck, and a wing comes off. 1 minute and 10 seconds into the mission, missile tracking radar is locked onto the next missile. Elevator missile launcher is not yet reloaded, so a side launcher has been selected. The ground speed of track 2 drops to almost 0. Battery commander assigns track 5 to the target tracking radar. Another target, another launch. 75 seconds into our mission, missile tracking radar is locked onto the next mission. Target missile. Target tracking radar is locked onto the new target, track 5. 1 minute, 20 seconds into our mission, the computer is settled with the new target tracking information. Predicted intercept point for track 5 is within range. Second missile is launched, headed to track 5. 2 minutes into our mission, 2 minutes into our mission, the missile elevator has been reloaded, raised, and erected, and is ready for firing. So that's kind of what it would be like to go through one of these launch, if you went to attack mode. Nike was deployed at 145 different sites around continental United States. See all the little blue blobs here, there, each one of those is a battalion. Nike Hercules was also deployed around 12 different allies overseas. This is the Chicago area. I'm talking about this because I was one of the areas that I was stationed, I'm pretty familiar with. I was stationed at Fort Sheridan up here, which at one time had a missile battery. When I was there, did not. And we'll talk about Jackson Park. Now, by the time I was there, Nike Ajax was no longer in use, so about 60% of those batteries are no longer in existence. Only the Nike Hercules batteries were still in effect. So this is Jackson Park. If you've been to Chicago, you've been by this, if you've been down on Lakeshore Drive. This is Lakeshore Drive winding along. This is Lake Michigan. This is Promontory Park. That's part of a park. That is where the Nike battery C-41's control radar area is. This is the Museum of Science and Industry. And this is where the C-41 launch site is, right here. So this is the launch site. You can see soldiers in a drill, and these are high-rise apartment buildings in Chicago. This is Promontory Park. This guy's playing Frisbee. These are radars from the Nike system right back there. This is Jackson Park again. It actually has Nike Hercules up. There's those same high-rise buildings. And this is another Chicago area site. This was Belmont Harbor. Is farther north along the coast. And as you can see, there's a launch site there. There were about 3 launch sites actually on Lake Michigan. People in Chicago sometimes didn't know all these nuclear weapons were sitting right down there on the thing. And west of Chicago at Homewood, Illinois, is another battery. So this is the IFC site, the Integrated Fire Control Site, and this is the launch site for Homewood. This is a battery in Milwaukee. This was right on the coast of the lake, downtown Milwaukee. This area is now used for festivals and things in downtown Milwaukee. The government was trying to court public acceptance because these missiles were putting around large population areas, and a lot of people were aware of them. This is the town square. You can see they have a missile on display in this town square. Army officers out here let people look at it. And they also invited people to open houses at the batteries. That all stopped once we went to nuclear warheads. Lassie was used to court public opinion during the Cold War. Timmy and Lassie actually went to a Nike site in one of the TV episodes, and the sergeant showing Timmy the missiles. This was another way to reach the public and make them comfortable with the Nike Hercules system. Air Defense Command, a RADCOM. This was in effect when I was there. This was created by the Army as an anti-aircraft command in 1950. It was redesignated as the Army Air Defense Command in 1957. It was formed to command Army air units responsible for air defense of the continental United States. This is their patch, a RADCOM patch. Oops. I don't want to miss this guy. This is the Ouzel Finch. This was the mascot of the Air Defense Command. It was a featherless bird that flies backward at supersonic speeds, grasping Soviet bombers out of the sky. Its eyes can rotate 180 degrees, so it has ability to look inward and is very self-aware. It was actually created in 1900s as a mascot for the Army Coast Artillery. It had nothing to do with missiles or anything then. It was later adopted by the Air Defense Command. Battery security was a big thing. Nuclear weapons on these sites. Most of the people had secret or top secret clearances. You see a guard here, that's a high power radar in the background. That's high power radar. This is a typical battery. We're talking about battery security now. You see this sign says sentry dogs. We'll get into that. This launch area, whoops. Launch area has two fences. See, I did that, didn't I? Launch area has two fences, an inner fence and an outer fence. In between those two fences, MPs with trained sentry dogs patrolled in the evenings and when nobody, well, most of the time. Those dogs were trained attack dogs. The only friend they had on earth was their handler. Every other human they would encounter, they attacked. If a dog handler left the area, they would try to train the dog to a new handler. If that couldn't be done, they would put the dog down. There was no way they could put those dogs in the hands of the public. You can see right here in the middle, they're actually training them to attack. I went to a battery one time. I was in a truck with a sergeant. He pulled up. I opened up my door and climbed out on the passenger side, and as I did and turned around, I was looking at a chain link fence and two German shepherds coming at me full tilt. I was glad the fence was there. Those were two of those attack dogs who were in their exercise area, right where I got out. That'll raise the hair on the back of your neck. Life on a Nike site. The government tried to attract people to sign up to be Nike soldiers. In this case, this is a advertising folder they put out, flyer, and it said, if you signed up, you know, it's pretty neat, you get to do this. They didn't have anything that big, and you probably get girls if you do that, I guess, I don't know. But anyway, they would guarantee you 14 months at the site you picked if you signed up for them. So you could, if you were somewhere like Chicago, you could sign up for a Nike site and be pretty close to home and be stationed there. Life on the site was manned by approximately 125 soldiers. You had to pull guard duty. Married troops and those who lived in local communities live off base. Crew members could pull coke and KP duty. KP, kitchen police, that's what KP stands for. In the mess hall, weeds had to be mowed, snow had to be removed. The site did have a basketball court for recreation. Life on the Nike site, again, battery operational status. So there were 3 or 4 different levels of operations that batteries stayed at. You had operating, a hot battery was operating 24/7. People had all the scopes all the time, rotating crews. Nobody left the site when they were on hot battery status. Cold battery, you had to be able to launch in 30 minutes. Personnel had to remain within 30 minutes of the site. I read a comment a guy read that he went somewhere to do something, and he went to a movie theater, and he thought he wasn't going to get him. And they actually, you had to give them a telephone number where you were going when you left the site. So while he was watching the movie, they stopped the film and called his name out over the PA in the theater. Then he had to go back to base. Cold battery was, like I said, launched in 30 minutes. Down battery would take 2 hours. There was probably usually a 4th battery was in intense maintenance. They weren't going to be ready for hours and hours. Had different readiness drills. An operational readiness evaluation was an unexpected visit while the battery's on hot status. So everybody's working intent on doing their job, and then the ORE team would show up and start throwing bugs at them and make them respond. Make sure they knew what they were doing. SNAP was a short notice annual practice. They went to McGregor Range in White Sands Proving Grounds and actually they would actually fire missiles. So they would come to a battery, give them a few days notice, and then a team would have to pack up and go to White Sands and actually fire missiles. So every battery did get to fire missiles every year. TPI was a technical proficiency inspection. The unit had to pass that to become nuclear qualified. While I was stationed at Fort Sheridan, I had to stand a technical proficiency inspection as being a nuclear ordnance unit. I didn't operate on a battery, I operated as ordnance. We were outside that, we were all regular Army. But they brought a team in that was made up of Navy, Army, and Air Force officers. I remember that they told me to run a certain test. I got equipment out to run the test. In the middle of the test, this Air Force colonel says, "What if you read this voltage?" Now you have to decide how to respond. If that's wrong, what do? You can never fail by saying, "Sir, I will refer to the manual." We talk about life on a Nike site. This is the radar site. You can see it has the radars. This would be an IFC, Integrated Fire Control Site. So here you see the radars. Here's the generator building. You see we got a basketball court, mess hall, admin building, and barracks. Really grandiose accommodations here. Concrete block buildings with metal roofs. And these were at a site that's probably been abandoned for a while, but that's what they look like. This was an admin building. This is a mess hall. You see the picnic table there. This is the barracks, and this is what the barracks look like inside. Although that looks better than most of the barracks I stayed in when I was in the Army. Almost all the barracks I were in were all World War II wood barracks. When I was in school, I was in a really nice barracks in New Mexico. These are some of the hazards you could run into. I don't know if maybe I will read this list. Being crushed to death, electrocution, attacked by a loose sentry dog, falling into an open pit, ignition of a booster by static electricity, exposure to toxic fumes and chemicals, red fuming nitric acid, asbestos, caked ice on radar tower ladders and platforms, cold metal sticking to your hands. I like this one, liver and onions. Electric shocks, radiation exposure, high pressure hydraulic lines bursting, and the danger of radiating antenna. Remember that one big antenna moving goes around about every 10 seconds. If you got in there with it, you'd have to run, not to be, body parts being sucked into cooling fans, and finding a nuclear Nike Hercules warhead armed itself after a power surge. We talk about SALT talks, Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. The concerns were first voiced by President Johnson in, I don't remember what year that was, but over the Soviet buildup of ABMs as anti-ballistic missiles. That's also what a Nike Hercules is, an anti-ballistic missile. LBJ started preliminary talks with Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin in 1967. President Richard Nixon continued the talks with Leonid Brezhnev in 1969 in Helsinki. I went before a board to become an E5, and they asked me if I knew what was going on in Helsinki. I said, no. They said, well, it has something to do with your job, you know. And Nixon signed the ABM treaty and interim SALT talk in May of 1972. SALT I treaty did not limit the increasing nuclear threat capability to use MIRVs, multiple independently targeted reentry vehicles. That's when one missile can release multiple warheads from one missile. SALT talks on SALT II started between Gerald Ford and Brezhnev in 1973. President Jimmy Carter and Soviet Premier Brezhnev signed SALT II treaty in 1979 in Vienna. But due to Soviet noncompliance and the invasion of Afghanistan, Carter asked the U.S. Senate not to consider SALT II for ratification. These are U.S. Army Cold War nuclear missiles. We talked about Nike Hercules. Mark said something about I need to talk about more nuclear stuff, I think, so that's what this is for. Davy Crockett was the first nuclear, it's not a missile really, it's a recoilless rifle with this nuclear warhead stuck on the end of it, and there's a cylinder in there that propels that. This is the Honest John. That was a self-propelled nuclear-armed missile. This was a Little John. It was towed. It was a little bit smaller than that. This is a Corporal. It's on a vehicle, can be fired as a mobile unit. That was a pretty powerful missile. This is a Sergeant, getting a lot more powerful. These were in Europe. Sergeants were in Europe, as were Pershings. Pershings were huge missiles. They were on large mobile trailers that could draw. There's pictures of them driving through German cities with these things. They were mobile. This was part of NATO. We worked with the Germans to defend them against the Soviets with these missiles. This missile is a Spartan, and this is a Sprint. The two of them together were put into a system called Safeguard that was supposed to protect our missiles in North Dakota and places like that where we had silos. They were in place for 1 month. It said it pulled the power on them, and that's it. They served for 1 month. And they were never employed more than one site. Now I'm talking about my personal involvement a little bit, if that's interesting enough, I don't know. After I got out of basic training, which I barely got through, because I was a marshmallow when I went into basic training, I had to do extra PT, and somebody stood outside and said he didn't get potatoes when I went in. Anyway, at Redstone Arsenal, when I was there, you see Werner von Braun was there. I saw him drive by in a staff car while I was at Redstone Arsenal. They were testing the moon rocket Saturn V's while I was there. That would shake the ground in the barracks when they fired those. We lived in these Quonset huts, barracks, which looked like half a beer can in the ground, buried in the ground. And while I was there, I got involved in riot control training. When Martin Luther King was assassinated, we were on call to go to Memphis, and some of us actually went to Memphis to fight riots. I didn't have to go. Personal involvement. This is Sandia Base, Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is where I got my training to be a nuclear soldier. That's got my name on it. That's the Defense Atomic Support Agency there. There's my name down here somewhere. This is the patch for a Defense Atomic Support Agency. For a while they wore those. Can you imagine getting on an airplane with that sewed on your uniform? Of course, in New Mexico, you got to worry about tumbleweed. We'd have to go out and police tumbleweed up off of the parade ground sometimes. In Sandia, they have a tramway that goes from Albuquerque up to 10,000 feet to Sandia Peak. This is Sandia Base, and this is me and the world's worst rock and roll band. We called ourselves, but we had these stickers we got for nuclear waste. They said contaminated waste. That became the name of the band. We had stuck on our backs, drums. This is Fort Riley, Kansas. I was in the 823rd Ordnance. That's the most I ever looked like a soldier right there. At Fort Riley, we were in the 823rd Ordnance Company. We didn't know why we were there. They never told us what our mission was. We took shots for like typhus, cholera, plague, typhoid, stuff like that. They told us we all had an M14 in the armory and go get our steel pots and web gear, put them on the locker. We were all electronics guys, warhead mechanics, forklift drivers. None of us were infantry trained, just basic training. One of the things they told me about 4 weeks after we got our M14s, they said, "Head, your secondary weapon's an M79 grenade launcher." That just smells like Vietnam. We finally assumed that we were in place after we saw a press conference on television. 4 of us went to chow for lunch. We came back. We went to the day room to watch TV after lunch because we didn't have to be back to our duty section. And President Nixon was in a press conference. And some reporter asked him, "Have you ruled out the use of nuclear weapons in Vietnam?" And he said, "We have not." Then we realized probably what we were doing. We were a mobile nuclear weapons depot company. Everything we had was on wheels. We even had trucks that would zip together to form a warhead maintenance facility, mobile, and it has self-contained breathing apparatus and a hydraulic lift to bring warheads inside. Inside it was like working in a submarine. And what else? When I was in training, there's an Honest John there. When I was in training in Sandia, they said, "Well, we trained you on Honest John, but you'll never see one. They're being phased out." One night while I was on guard duty, it was just about twilight, I heard vehicles coming in, and over the horizon I saw 2 mobile Honest John launchers at Fort Riley. I assumed if we were going to be the ordnance unit that was deployed, those were the missiles we were going to be to support to go to Vietnam. This is at Fort Sheridan in Chicago, Illinois. I spent some time there. This is a photograph I took myself of a Nike Hercules sitting outside our missile assembly building at Fort Sheridan on a trailer in the snow in Chicago, of course. This is what Fort Sheridan looks like. This tower, and this were the offices. That's all a big condo thing now. They've closed Fort Sheridan down, but they saved that as a big condo facility. This is my workstation. That's where I worked. This is John Packett. This is Norman Smith. I can't remember his name. But anyway, that was where I worked at Fort Sheridan. And that guy's name's Ron Cleveland. This is a Nike launcher erector being maintained and have work done in the facility there. That's all I've got. Thanks everybody for attending and pay attention. Do we have any questions? Uh-oh.
Think of your questions if you can. I'll make a couple statements before. Larry brought up a couple things. He brought up, I think, a destroyer, but the destroyers, we had Admiral Zumwalt's son come and talk about 3 years ago, and that's probably one of the most advanced missile launchers in the Navy right now, is the Zumwalt. It's a destroyer built in about 2016. He also mentioned about von Braun. We're going to have Tom David talk about von Braun in the spring of this year. He had some family members that was closely associated with von Braun. Von Braun was crucial in helping with our atomic energy in the United States. And Larry, I didn't hear you talk about Patriot missiles, but the Patriot missile, when I was in the Persian Gulf War, they saved our lives. Because a Patriot missile, you said a little bit about that's more advanced than what you showed.
I was only talking about nuclear weapons. Patriots are not nuclear.
But they used the Patriot missiles in Vietnam or in the Persian Gulf War, and it's sages because they knocked out every radar that the Saddam Hussein had. So nobody could communicate with anybody. It was so important. But the Patriot missiles, I think, did all that without nuclear warheads.
I stopped talking about 1974.
Yeah. And the Patriots more advanced than yours because they go higher, a little faster. Is that why they're more advanced?
I don't know if they were more advanced. They weren't steered by radar on the ground. They weren't going after high altitude targets, but they did have a longer range and carry. Were great at attacking ground targets. They were designed specifically to attack ground targets.
Okay, we got questions over here. Yes, ma'am. This is Mrs. Boots Whitty, Barbara Boots Whitty.
Questions. Number one, what did they do with the leftovers? And number two, we just saw all these Israelis shooting missiles, destroying other missiles. I mean, the technology's just come so far.
Well, this is kind of interesting. I was shopping, and I think it may have been, what's the place that sells? Harbor Freight. I think it was in Harbor Freight. And I was standing there, and some guy, and I had I think a veteran's hat on or something, and a guy walked up to me and says, "Oh, you were in the Army, yeah, what'd you do?" I said, "Well, I was a nuclear weapons electronics guy," and he said, hold on a minute. He went running through the store, and he comes back with another guy. And another guy said, "What did you do?" He said, "Well, I was a 55G. Well, that's a warhead mechanic. I said, "I was a 35F, and he knew immediately. He said, "Oh, you're an electronics guy." And then he told me that part of his job was deactivating Nike Hercules missiles, taking them apart, and they found, they would break down the warheads. There's a way to do that, to dispose of that. But anyway, they did. All those Nike Hercules, most of them have been taken down. A lot of them had conventional, they took the warhead out. There's probably 25 sitting around the country as monuments or, displays somewhere.
But the elements of the nuclear, is it they're all buried out in Nevada somewhere about 500 feet down, or where is all the nuclear waste put?
I can't tell you.
All right. Questions? We got a couple back here. This is Don Johnson.
Hi, Larry. Great job. I couldn't keep when they did the simulated launch in 5 seconds, 50 seconds, 2 minutes. So my question is, were there always missiles above ground ready to go?
Not necessarily.
Okay, so I got a word. Now it's 0. So how long did it take to get it from up and ready and go?
Well, they may have had some up, but on the launcher at the time, depending on their status. But to get a missile up there was just maybe 30 seconds.
Oh, really?
The launcher could take it up, then they shove it down to the launcher section. Now, if they launch it right off the elevator door, all they got to do is put one on there, raise the elevator, and it's ready to launch.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Respect to that question, we've got another one over here. Somebody, but the missile was going 3,500 miles an hour, and the plane was going 500 miles an hour. Is that about right?
Well, actually, if it was a jet plane in that demonstration, the target was going over Mach 1. The missile could go Mach 3.65.
What is that in miles an hour?
I don't remember. I could go back to that slide that's on there, but it's well over 2,000 miles an hour.
It was gliding because it had enough momentum to catch that.
Now, once they would take a Nike Hercules missile up real high, maybe 100,000 feet. Once the they only had 30 seconds burn on the sustainer engine. Only had about 3.4 seconds on the booster. By that time, you were already up 1,000 feet. Then once the Hercules got you up to maybe 100,000 feet, they didn't need the engine anymore. Now they just coasted down to where the target was.
Why did that have its explosive go outside the plane about 100 feet or so? Why didn't it hit the plane itself?
Well, a Nike Hercules nuclear round only had to be within 30 feet of the plane and blow it apart, because it was nuclear. If it was a conventional round, they had to get really close. And that's why the old Ajax was outmoded. It had to get close, and it could only take out one plane at a time.
What was the actual nuclear material in these nuclear weapons?
Yes.
Wait a minute, she got to repeat. Nobody can hear her.
Okay. Sorry. What was the actual nuclear material? What's the actual nuclear material in nuclear weapons?
I don't know, and I'm not sure I should talk about it if I did. But anyway, it was nuclear material. The Nike Hercules warhead was basically an implosion device. So it was nuclear material surrounded by high explosive material. The high explosive compressed the nuclear material, and then you would get a nuclear explosion.
I was saying, thinking back to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I think implosion would have been the plutonium.
Yeah, I can't tell you exactly what isotopes was used in those warheads like the W-31. I could probably look it up somewhere, but maybe.
I went to a lecture one time, I don't know if it was true or not, but they said that the big boy and little boy were about 9 and 10% efficient. So think if they were 100% efficient, they were not efficient bombs. So, 100,000, 80,000 people.
A Nike Hercules warhead was probably 20 times one of those, 20 kilotons.
He's got to talk, then we'll come back to the microphone. Say your name.
Marion Seibert.
You put the microphone to the mouth.
Okay, Marion Seibert. Okay, the explosion, the one that didn't hit the plane, okay, where did that go? Did it explode on its own somewhere?
If you didn't hit the plane,
Yeah.
I don't know that we ever experienced that, but they were never fired in anger. There was never a Nike Hercules missile fired at an enemy target. The whole time we had that system in place.
Well, in that simulation, I just wondered, like the first one missed, did they send another one up? That first one that missed, where did it go?
Well, they could initiate a destruct burst, which was a non-nuclear explosion. That would break it up into pieces. You still had nuclear material, but you didn't get a nuclear explosion.
Oh, okay.
There was a way to do that. There was a destructor lead on that warhead. I actually handled that before. One time I went out to a site, I forgot to mention this. I went down into the warhead bay, into the missile bay in that magazine. The Army knew exactly where every warhead is, what every missile it was attached to. We got a classified document in our, I was in ordnance. So we were not part of the batteries. We were a regular Army unit that was in the area where they were, and we had to support all the batteries. So we got a classified document that said this warhead needed to have resistance checks on certain places. So we went out to the battery, a sergeant and I go down into the magazine. I've got a ladder up on the side of the inspection port by the warhead. We opened that up. I disconnected a cable from the warhead, pulled it out so I could see the pins on the jack where that would plug in. And then the sergeant told me I needed to read the resistance between I to J, although I wasn't sure whether he said I to J or I to K. And I asked him, as I'm standing there with my probes almost into the jack on that warhead, I said, did you say I to J or I to K? And he told me what it was. And there was an artilleryman standing next to me, and he said, you're measuring resistance. Doesn't that put voltage into the warhead? Which is how a resistance works. You measure the voltage drop. I said, yes. He says, what if you hit the wrong pin? I said, I don't know.
Thank you, Larry. My name is Mike Williams. Good presentation. Can you tell us about how many Nike sites there were in the U.S.?
There were about 145 sites in the U.S. Now, some of them had multiple sites, but about 145 batteries in the United States. There were a few in Alaska, and there are multiple overseas. I showed a slide with motorized equipment. So in Europe, Nikes were they were motorized. They weren't static like we were here in the States. They actually could move those batteries. The radars were on trailers, the missiles on goers, and that's because they had to move them from site to site, keep the Soviets from knowing where they were, and be ready to respond. The Dutch and Finnish and other troops actually worked in West Germany with us using our Nike technology.
We moved into southeastern Indiana in 1959. There was 2 Nike missile bases about 30 miles from Cincinnati, right in the corner of Indiana.
Right.
The word was that was protection around Cincinnati. Is that the way they did that?
That's right. So the Cincinnati-Akron area had batteries protecting it. There were batteries around St. Louis, batteries around Chicago. I have to go back to that slide, but there were batteries certain in Detroit. I remember I went up to Detroit one time, TDY from Chicago, to do calibration for batteries that were around Detroit. And I also didn't show a slide. After I left Fort Sheridan in Illinois, I was stationed in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. There were 4 batteries around Minneapolis, St. Paul that I did go work on those batteries, support those batteries too.
When they decommissioned these sites, they were sold back to the public, and one of them, the silos, were made into an underground house that was really pretty sharp. I think it's sold again not too long ago.
Yeah.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you. A lot of those sites some of them are just sitting around decaying, and they've been, all the stuff was taken out of them. And you see pictures of people looking down the stairway and they're full of water, or the magazines are full of water, but there's still old Nike sites sitting around with a fence around them. But a lot of them were auctioned off, like you said.
Some literature has that these are only 70% to 80% efficient. So after you shot that first shot, were you ready for a second and third shot?
Well, if you got within 50 feet of a enemy bomber, you were going to take it out. You weren't going to miss it. And you would get the next shot off probably in 60 seconds or thereabout.
Would that have been enough time for that example you showed?
Not necessarily, well, usually, but I think somebody said with all of our defensive systems that we had for missiles, we would have never got them all. Whether that was Nike, Hercules, or whatever we had, chance of getting them all, particularly into a multiple warhead, there was no way a multiple warhead missile, we were going to get all those with Nike Hercules system.
You didn't talk about radar jammers. Didn't they get jammed a lot?
Well, they used chaff, and they tried to use electronic jamming. I did talk about electronic countermeasures. We went to the second radar, target ranging radar, and sometimes there was an operator behind the control desk, and he had a thing in his hand, and he could change the frequencies on things to get through the chaff and the stuff. They had a pretty good way of getting through the electronic countermeasures that the enemy bomber might be putting out.
Any other questions in the crowd? Thank you, Larry. Excellent talk. We got 17 lunches. You want an extra lunch?
Thank you.